Hey everybody, welcome back. If you're out there grabbing coffee, come on back in. This is our final formal plenary session that I know I am going to find alarming. I don't know if you're going to find it alarming. No, of course you're not going to. But we have three scholars who know a lot about China, both as sort of in terms of their scholarship, in terms of their travel, their business activities in China. So we've got really interesting final panel here. When we organized this, no one was thinking anything about viri. We were thinking more about trade wars, but who knows what the future will bring. So we're going to start with Brian Wu, who's an associate professor of strategy here at the Ross School of Business, and then Chris Marquis and Doug Guthrie. So Brian, I hope you can hear us up there.
Very clearly, very well. Hello?
Unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
All right, great. Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Doug, for being there. I am in California now, so there are some confirmed virus cases. So I figured that it's better for me not to travel there in person. So I'd like to start my presentation with this so-called smiling curve, which shows the value distribution along the global value chain. So I have done a lot of research around this topic. So I really appreciate the opportunity to present my research here and also share some thoughts, especially in combination with some recent events. So I believe this curve can help explain a great deal of what's going on now. In fact, Doug is here, right? So Doug can share with us about Apple's global strategy and especially where their profits come from. So basically, China entered the WTO, or World Trade Organization, around 2003. And ever since, it has become the factory or manufacturing factory of the world. And seeing this opportunity, Western firms like Apple or Nike, they use the outsourcing strategy to manage their global value chain. Why? Because they can keep, as you can see, the high value added activities like R&D or design or marketing in-house, while just outsourcing low value added activities like manufacturing, right, to suppliers in emerging economies like China, where the labor costs in particular are much lower, right? In fact, the picture here of this girl, I visited the plants there, a shoe company. The cost is very low, so they make about let's say 400 or 500 US dollars per month, right? So 4 or 5 of them share a door, the bunk beds. So it's a cost very low. But as a consequence of this global collaboration, right? So far it's been a win-win strategy, right? Because of this collaboration and because also the open door and the reform policy in China, China's GDP, as you can see on the upper left corner, right? So China's GDP grew by nearly 30-fold over 30 years. It's just incredible, right? It became the second largest economy in the world, and also lifted at least, I believe, 600 million people, right? 600 million people out of poverty. It's quite an accomplishment. But at the same time, there is a huge cost, as you can see, right? So I can show only one picture about the air pollution, but also there is a land pollution, the water pollution, but also there is a, excess capacity and also income disparity and the lack of openness and also intellectual property issues. Right? So a lot of issues too. So that's, the issues within China. But also US, the United States as a whole, also benefited from China's integration into the global value chain or from the outsourcing strategy that I shared just now, right? So I mean, obviously, Apple, right? So Apple stock price, I mean, it's not just 30 times, it's, I don't know how many times, probably 1,000 times, right? So as a whole, Apple benefited, right? I think more generally, probably West Coast, East Coast, or California or New York, they benefited a great deal from this kind of global collaboration, right? At the same time, I think the issue here is also, within US, right? So a subpopulation lost the traditional jobs, right? The manufacturing jobs, where, the United States no longer have comparative advantage, right? So they lost this comparative advantage, but, these stakeholders didn't get compensated, right? Meaning that they lost jobs and the wealth flew to West Coast, East Coast, but they kind of forgotten, right? The so-called, Rust Belt. And in fact, Jerry had this book, Vanishing American Corporation, right? So essentially documented, this dynamics over time. So now, in fact, I believe both countries should have worked harder to address domestic issues, right? So within China, income disparity, developing capabilities, become more open, etc. Versus within US, there should be, all the let's say job creation along the Rust Belt, a number of other things, the United States could have done, right, to address domestic issues. But very often, as human beings, right, it's always easier to blame others, to blame outsiders when there are domestic issues, right? So let's get a war, with another country versus trying to seriously address domestic tensions within each country, right? So I think that's in part why we see this kind of escalation in trade wars, right? So, you can say, personally, based on my research and based on my also life experiences, right? So I lived the first 25 years in China, and then, second, I would say 20 years in the US, right? So I think, the issues is more like within each country, right? So almost on the road versus kind of, between the two countries, right? So that's my observation. Now, when it's come to research, since the theme of this conference is, to kind of bridge research with practice. So what we study actually is with my co-author, Zhixi Wang, former PhD students in operations at Michigan Ross. So what we studied was this shift, right? So from the traditional focus on this, what we call willing or mutually beneficial vertical spillovers, right? So for example, let's say GM, right, General Motors, transfer their capabilities to their suppliers within China. And then General Motors would face the end consumers. But more recently, you see Chinese firms, they also want to, climb the global value chain, right? So they want to enter the end user or product market because, profit margins are much higher there, right? And also in a number of other markets like cell phones, sportswear, etc. Right? So I think that's kind of you can see the change, right? So from a traditional, collaborative relationship to the current almost competitive relationship. Now, the first reaction of the United States obviously is to dumping, right? We call this relationship based on a game theoretical model, right? We call that dumping, meaning that the United States can terminate the relationship and close the window to the supplier's capability development. Almost like if you come back to this picture, right? So basically what the US can do is to get rid of this ladder or close this window, right? Through which Chinese firms can climb this curve, right? But our model also shows that there are many other more productive relationships, right? By that, we mean one is that could be a accommodating strategy, meaning that in the past, remember the first picture shows that the US firms, let's say Apple, would pay suppliers very minimum compensation, right? Let's say a worker can make from China, right, can make, let's say, $1. Now, an easier strategy is, instead of dumping your supplier, you could give them more, right? So give them like $2, $3, right? So just a little more, so that they don't want to rebel, right? They don't want to depart. They don't want to kind of climb the value chain and compete with you. And the third strategy is that, which I'm very excited about, is to actually pay them even less, right? So instead of paying them more, you could pay them even less. The idea is to squeeze out, right? To squeeze out all the possible profits before the Chinese firms can learn the knowledge from you, before they can rebel, before they can enter the product market. And during this time window, the US firm can leverage its most fundamental capabilities, right? The innovation, right? So innovation capabilities are the fundamental economic drivers of this society and this economy, right? To create the next generation of technology. And then this let Chinese firms just, benefit in the short term, right? So we can prove mathematically that that could also be equilibrium. Now, the larger point here is that, of course, they depends on different industry characteristics, different firm characteristics, a number of other parameters. The larger point here is that, we don't want to just, think about this, one-off or this black and white strategy. Okay, let's dump, let's, break up, right? So there are many other possibilities. So the final thoughts of my presentation is that, again, instead of fighting wars between countries, right? So there are better alternatives, right? Could probably, more carefully, more seriously address domestic problems, but also, even between countries, right? So there are better alternatives, right? So the second thought is that, it's just so unfortunate, right? So adding to trade wars, there is also this global, virus problem. So now one could think of, there are two bad problems. But on the other hand, we could also think about, well, can we use the virus as a motivation, right? For different countries to coordinate, right? To search for better equilibrium, right? Both within and across countries. For China, for example, more, let's say, freedom of information, right? So more sharing, instead of a top-down, maybe more bottom-up approach, right? So within US, the same, right? So perhaps, just changing the trade policy, right? So instead of fighting a trade war, could think about alternatives, which I think could probably be a better solution than, other means like monetary policies or physical policies to kind of address the, economic problems caused by the virus, as demonstrated by the, stock market in this past week, right? So that's just my thoughts. I'll just turn it over to Doug and Chris. Thank you.